They say blood is thicker than water. But no one tells you that blood can freeze solid on black ice while your family drives away in their heated Range Rover, leaving you and your 5-year-old son to die in the November darkness. My name is Chloe, and this is the story of how my family tried to kill me, and how I made sure they wished they had succeeded. I should have seen it coming. The signs were there all along, scattered like breadcrumbs through my entire life. But when you grow up as the black sheep of a wealthy Connecticut family, you learn to accept cruelty as love. You learn to mistake neglect for independence. You learn to believe that maybe, just maybe, if you try hard enough, they will finally see you as worthy. I was 32 years old that Thanksgiving, a struggling freelance writer barely making ends meet in a cramped apartment in New Haven. My son Leo was 5, bright-eyed and full of questions about why we never lived in a big house like Aunt Ashley. I had been a single mother since Leo was born, after his father left when he found out I was pregnant. My family had made their disappointment crystal clear. My mother Eleanor had actually said the words, "Well, this is just typical of you, Chloe, always making the wrong choices." Ashley, my older sister by 3 years, had done everything right. She married Marcus, a finance director at a prominent Wall Street investment firm. They lived in a pristine colonial in Greenwich, drove matching luxury cars, and posted their perfect life all over Instagram. Their Christmas cards looked like they came straight from a Hallmark movie. Meanwhile, I was the daughter my parents introduced with a grimace and a quick change of subject. Every family gathering was a reminder of my inadequacy. My father Richard, a retired corporate lawyer, would ask about my writing with barely concealed contempt. "Still working on that novel?" he would say, the word novel dripping with sarcasm. My mother would sigh dramatically and turn to Ashley to discuss her latest charity gala or vacation to the Hamptons. I was the obligatory invite, the disappointment they had to acknowledge because society demanded it. But I kept showing up. I kept hoping. I kept believing that somewhere beneath their cold exterior, they loved me. That is the curse of being the unloved child. You spend your entire life trying to earn what should have been freely given. That Thanksgiving started like all the others. The invitation came via a terse email from my mother 3 weeks before. "Family dinner at 6. Don't be late." No warmth, no personal message, just a command. I debated not going. Leo and I could have had our own quiet celebration with a small turkey and his favorite movies. But that nagging voice in my head, the one that had been trained since childhood, whispered that maybe this time would be different. Maybe this year they would see me. I spent money I didn't have on a new dress for myself and a little suit for Leo. I wanted us to look put together, to show them we were doing fine. I practiced conversation topics in my car on the drive from New Haven to their estate in Westport. The house sat on 3 acres of manicured lawn, a massive colonial with white columns that looked like something from a southern plantation. It had been in my mother's family for generations, a constant reminder of the pedigree I had supposedly tarnished. Ashley and Marcus had arrived before us. Their Range Rover was already in the circular driveway, gleaming under the outdoor lights. I parked my beat-up Honda Civic off to the side, trying to make it as invisible as possible. Leo clutched my hand as we walked up the stone pathway. He could sense the tension already. Children always can. My mother opened the door wearing a cream cashmere sweater set in pearls. Her eyes swept over me with barely concealed disapproval. "You're late," she said, though we were 10 minutes early, "and Leo's shoes are untied. Really, Chloe, can't you at least make sure the child looks presentable?" I knelt down to tie Leo's shoes, my face burning. Through the doorway, I could hear Ashley's laughter, bright and carefree. She was already holding court in the living room, no doubt regaling our parents with stories of Marcus's latest promotion or their upcoming ski trip to Aspen. The dinner itself was excruciating. The table was set with my mother's finest china, the kind that cost more per plate than my monthly grocery budget. Ashley sat across from me, her diamond tennis bracelet catching the light from the chandelier. She talked about their renovated kitchen, their new boat, their plans to send their future children to private schools. I tried to contribute to the conversation, mentioning a piece I had gotten published in a small literary magazine, but my father cut me off. "That's nice, Chloe," he said dismissively, then turned to Marcus. "So, tell me about this merger your firm is handling. I read about it in the journal." I watched Leo pick at his food, overwhelmed by the formality and the cold atmosphere. He was used to our tiny kitchen table, where we ate mac and cheese and told silly stories. This world of stuffy traditions and cutting remarks was foreign to him. I squeezed his hand under the table, trying to reassure him. After dinner, my mother brought out dessert, an elaborate pumpkin cheesecake from a famous bakery in Greenwich. As she sliced it, she made a show of giving Ashley a large piece. "You deserve it, darling. You work so hard on that perfect figure." Then she slid a tiny sliver onto my plate. "Just a small piece for you, Chloe. You've put on weight, haven't you?" Ashley smirked. I felt something inside me crack a little more, but I smiled and thanked her for the dessert. That was what I always did. I swallowed the humiliation and pretended everything was fine. Around 9, I started gathering our things to leave. Leo was exhausted, rubbing his eyes and leaning against me. I thanked my parents for dinner, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Ashley barely looked up from her phone as we said goodbye. My mother handed me a small container of leftovers, not the generous portions she always sent Ashley home with, but a meager serving that made it clear I was an afterthought. As Leo and I stepped outside, I noticed the temperature had dropped dramatically. The light rain from earlier had created a treacherous glaze over everything. Black ice. The most dangerous kind. Invisible and deadly. I held Leo's hand tightly as we made our way down the stone pathway toward my car. Each step was careful, measured. I could see my breath in the cold air, and Leo's teeth were already chattering despite his winter coat. Then it happened. My foot hit a patch of ice I couldn't see. For a split second, I was airborne, and then I was falling. I tried to twist my body to protect Leo, to make sure he didn't hit the ground. I managed to push him away from me, but that meant I took the full impact. The sound of my leg breaking was distinct, a sharp crack that echoed in the quiet night. The pain was immediate and overwhelming, radiating up from my shin like fire. I screamed. I couldn't help it. The pain was unlike anything I had ever experienced. Leo was crying, scared by my fall and my scream. I tried to reassure him through my tears, tried to tell him Mommy was okay even though I knew I wasn't. Blood was already seeping through my jeans from where the bone had broken through the skin, a compound fracture. I knew enough from a long-ago first aid class to recognize that this was serious. The front door opened. Relief flooded through me despite the pain. They had heard me. They would help. My father appeared first, silhouetted in the doorway. I raised my hand, trying to wave, trying to signal that I needed help. He walked closer, and I waited for concern, for alarm, for any normal human reaction to seeing their daughter seriously injured. Instead, he frowned. "Get up, Chloe," he said, his voice hard. "Stop making a scene. The Hendersons can see you from their house." I stared at him, unable to process what he was saying. "Dad, I can't. I think my leg is broken. Please, I need help." My mother appeared behind him, wrapped in her cashmere shawl. She looked down at me, and I saw her face twist, not in sympathy but in disgust. "Oh my God," she said shrilly. "Ashley, be careful. Her blood is getting all over the pathway, those Christian Louboutin pumps we just bought you for your birthday." Ashley emerged, pulling her coat on. She looked at me the way someone might look at roadkill, with detached revulsion. "Of course," she said, shaking her head. "It always has to be about you, doesn't it, Chloe? Can't even get through one Thanksgiving without making it all about your drama. You've ruined the entire evening." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The pain in my leg was agonizing, blood was pooling beneath me, and they were concerned about shoes and ruined evenings. Leo was sobbing now, clinging to my coat, terrified. Mommy, please get up." "Please," I begged, hating how desperate I sounded. "Please just call an ambulance. Leo is cold and scared, and I need a hospital." My father turned away. "You got yourself into this mess. You can get yourself out of it. We have guests arriving for after-dinner drinks in 20 minutes, and we can't have this spectacle on our doorstep." "Richard, let's go," my mother said. "We need to change before the Vanderbilts arrive." She actually stepped over my outstretched hand, careful to avoid the blood. Ashley walked past me toward the Range Rover. As she did, she deliberately used the toe of her expensive pump to kick my purse, sending it sliding across the icy pathway away from me. "Always so clumsy," she muttered. "Always so pathetic." I watched in disbelief as all three of them got into the Range Rover. The engine started with a purr, the heated seats already warming them. They didn't look back. They simply drove past me, past their grandson crying on the freezing ground, and disappeared down the driveway. The red taillights faded into the darkness, and Leo and I were left alone. The shock almost overwhelmed the pain. My own family had just left me to die. There was no other way to interpret it. With a compound fracture in this weather, unable to move, with a small child, I could easily die of hypothermia before anyone found us, and they knew it. They had looked at me bleeding on the ice and decided I was an inconvenience, an embarrassment, something to be driven away from. Leo's crying brought me back to reality. I had to move. I had to get us help. The pain when I tried to drag myself was indescribable. Every inch I moved sent shards of agony through my leg, but I could see lights in the distance, about a mile down the road. A diner, one of those classic 24-hour places that dotted Connecticut highways. If I could just get us there, we would be safe. I wrapped my arms around Leo and began to pull us both across the ice. He tried to help, his little legs pushing against the ground. "We're going on an adventure, baby," I told him through gritted teeth. "We're going to get somewhere warm and safe. Can you be brave for Mommy?" He nodded, his face streaked with tears. "I'm cold, Mommy." "I know, sweetheart, I know. Just hold on to me." The journey was endless. Each movement was torture. I left a trail of blood behind us on the ice, my vision blurred from the pain and blood loss. I had to stop several times to keep from passing out. Leo stayed pressed against me, sharing what little warmth he had. I kept talking to him, telling him stories, anything to keep him calm and keep myself conscious. By the time we reached the parking lot of the diner, I was barely aware of anything except the need to keep moving. The neon sign that read, Rosie's Diner, open 247 was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I used the last of my strength to push open the door, and we half fell, half crawled inside. The warmth hit me like a physical force. A man in a trucker cap was sitting at the counter with coffee. He jumped up immediately. Jesus Christ, what happened to you? Please, I managed to say. My son, he's cold, help him. The man, I would later learn his name was Frank, immediately pulled off his heavy jacket and wrapped it around Leo. He was shouting for someone to call 911, barking orders in a voice used to being obeyed. A waitress appeared with blankets. Another customer, a nurse finishing her night shift, knelt beside me and started assessing my injuries. Compound fracture, she said tersely. Possible hypothermia. How long have you been outside? I don't know, I whispered. Maybe 40 minutes. We walked from up the road. You walked? Frank's voice was incredulous. Lady, you should be dead. How the hell did you walk a mile with that leg? I looked at Leo, now wrapped in Frank's coat and drinking hot chocolate the waitress had brought. I had to. The ambulance arrived within minutes. The paramedics were shocked at my injuries and my story. As they loaded me onto the stretcher, Frank held Leo's hand. I'll follow you to the hospital. Make sure the little guy is okay, he said. Don't you worry about nothing. I started crying then, not from pain but from the kindness of this stranger. A man I had never met had shown me more compassion in 10 minutes than my own family had in 32 years. At the hospital, the doctors confirmed what I already knew. I had broken both my tibia and fibula, the two bones of the lower leg. The compound fracture meant the bone had pierced the skin, creating a high risk of infection. I needed immediate surgery. I also had the beginning stages of hypothermia. If we had been outside much longer, Leo and I might not have made it. While I was being prepped for surgery, 2 police officers arrived to take my statement. They were horrified by what had happened. Let me get this straight, the older officer said, his face red with anger. Your parents and sister saw you fall, saw you were seriously injured and just drove away? Left you and your kid on the ice? Yes, I said simply. And they were at this address? He showed me his notepad where he had written my parents' Westport estate address. Yes. The officers exchanged glances. Ma'am, what they did is a crime. That's reckless endangerment at minimum, possibly attempted manslaughter given the severity of your injuries and the weather conditions. Do you want to press charges? For the first time in my life, I didn't hesitate. I didn't make excuses for them. I didn't try to minimize what they had done. Yes, I said. I want to press charges, against all 3 of them. The younger officer nodded approvingly. Good. Because what they did to you and your son is unforgivable. We'll start the process immediately. In the meantime, do you feel you or your son are in danger from these individuals? I don't want them near us ever again, I said. We can help you with an emergency protective order right now. It will go into effect immediately and bar them from contacting you or coming near you or your son. Does that sound like something you want? Yes, please. They had the paperwork drawn up within an hour. I signed it from my hospital bed, my hand shaking not from fear but from a strange sense of liberation. For the first time in my life, I was putting up a boundary. I was saying no more. The surgery took 4 hours. When I woke up, my leg was in a cast from hip to toe, secured with metal pins and plates. The doctor told me I would need months of physical therapy, that I might always have a limp, that the healing process would be long and painful. None of that mattered. I was alive, and more importantly, Leo was safe. Frank had stayed the entire time, keeping Leo entertained in the waiting room. When I was moved to a recovery room, he brought Leo in to see me. My son's face lit up. Mommy, the doctor said you're going to be okay. I am, baby. I'm going to be fine. Frank cleared his throat awkwardly. Listen, I know this ain't my place, but I called a friend of mine who works at a shelter called The Haven. It's a place that helps women and kids in tough situations. They got resources, legal help, all that. I figured you might need some support, especially with the charges and all. She said they got space if you need it when you get out of here. I looked at this stranger who had saved our lives and was still trying to help. Thank you, I said, tears streaming down my face. Thank you so much. Don't mention it. What your family did, that ain't right. Ain't nobody should be treated that way, especially not by their own blood. 3 days later, I was discharged from the hospital on crutches, with strict instructions to keep weight off my leg for at least 2 months. A social worker from the Haven picked us up. The shelter wasn't what I expected. It was a converted Victorian house in a quiet neighborhood of New Haven, painted cheerful yellow with a small playground in the back. Inside, it was warm and welcoming, staffed by kind people who had seen too many stories like mine. They gave us a small room with 2 beds. It was clean and simple, more space than we needed. But more than the physical space, they gave us something precious. They gave us safety. They gave us resources. And they gave me time to think. During those first weeks at the Haven, as my legs slowly healed and Leo started to laugh again, I made a decision. My family had tried to destroy me. They had left me to die because I was an embarrassment to them. But I had survived. And I was going to make sure they regretted what they had done. I started gathering evidence. It wasn't hard. Years of text messages, emails, voicemails, all documenting the emotional abuse. I had saved them without really knowing why. Perhaps some part of me always knowing I would need proof someday. Messages from Ashley calling me a leech and a loser. Emails from my mother criticizing my parenting, my career, my life choices. Voicemails from my father berating me for embarrassing the family name. I also had something else. I had my story. And I had learned long ago that stories have power. I started a podcast. I called it The Heirloom of Scars, named for the way trauma gets passed down through families like a terrible inheritance. I used voice-changing software to protect my identity initially. I wanted to build an audience first, wanted to create something that couldn't be easily dismissed or silenced. The first few episodes were general. I talked about toxic families, about the psychology of scapegoating, about the ways wealth and status can corrupt family dynamics. I interviewed therapists and social workers. I shared research. I built credibility. And then I released the episode that would change everything. I called it The Thanksgiving Verdict. In that episode, I told my story, all of it. The years of emotional abuse, the blatant favoritism, the way I had been treated as less than human. And then I described in vivid detail what had happened that Thanksgiving night. How my family had watched me break my leg on their property. How they had mocked me as I bled. How they had driven away and left me and my 5-year-old son to die in the freezing darkness. I played some of the voicemails. I read excerpts from the text messages and emails, all carefully edited to avoid full names but leaving enough detail that anyone who knew them would recognize who I was talking about. I described their wealth, their social status, their obsession with image. I described what it was like to grow up as the family disappointment, to never be good enough, to always be the source of shame. And I described what happened after. The kind stranger who saved us, the police report, the criminal charges, the way I was rebuilding my life with my son, refusing to be silenced any longer. The episode went viral. Within a week, it had been downloaded over 1 million times. People were sharing it on social media, discussing it on forums, dissecting every detail. The true crime community, always hungry for stories of family dysfunction and injustice, latched onto it immediately. And then the internet detectives went to work. It didn't take them long. I had mentioned Connecticut, Westport specifically, and a wealthy family with ties to finance and law. I had described the colonial estate, the Range Rover, the Thanksgiving timeline. Someone found the police report, which was public record. Someone else found my parents' names in local news articles about their charity work. Ashley's Instagram, which she had made public in her quest for influencer status, provided the final pieces. Within 2 weeks of the episode airing, the internet had identified my family. And then the real reckoning began. The first sign that the story had reached them came when my lawyer at the Haven told me Ashley's attorney had sent a cease and desist letter. I laughed when I read it. It threatened legal action for defamation, for invasion of privacy, for emotional distress. It claimed I was lying, that the Thanksgiving incident had been exaggerated, that I was trying to extort money from them. My lawyer, a fierce woman named Maria, who volunteered her time at the Haven, smiled grimly. Let them sue. Everything you said is documented. You have the police report, the hospital records, the witness statements from Frank and the paramedics. You have years of messages proving the emotional abuse. This letter is just desperation. She was right. Ashley's attorney must have advised her that a lawsuit would only bring more attention to what had happened. The letter was never followed up with actual legal action. But the damage to them was just beginning. Marcus was the first casualty. His firm, a prestigious Wall Street investment company, prided itself on its image. They managed money for some of the wealthiest families in America, and reputation was everything. When the story broke, and Marcus was identified as the man who had left his sister-in-law and nephew to die on the ice, the firm moved quickly. They couldn't afford the association. Marcus was quietly let go, spun as a mutual decision to pursue other opportunities, but everyone knew the truth. Without Marcus's income, Ashley's carefully curated lifestyle began to crumble. The Greenwich house had a massive mortgage, the luxury cars were leased, the designer clothes, the expensive dinners, the exotic vacations were all funded by a salary that was suddenly gone. And in their social circle, failure was contagious. Friends stopped calling, invitations dried up. Ashley found herself suddenly and completely isolated, cut off from the world she had valued above everything, including basic human decency. My parents fared no better. They were prominent members of their country club, their church, their social organizations. My father sat on the board of several local charities. My mother was president of her garden club and a fixture at high society events. They had built their entire identity around being pillars of the community, representatives of old money values and class. When the story broke, they were systematically removed from all of it. The country club asked them to resign their membership. The church asked my father to step down from the parish council. The charities quietly replaced him on their boards. My mother's garden club friends stopped returning her calls. The gossip in Westport was vicious. Everyone was talking about the couple who had left their own daughter to die, who had valued their image over their child's life. I watched it all unfold from my safe distance, and I felt no guilt. I felt only a grim satisfaction. They had spent my entire life making me feel worthless. Now the world could see them for what they truly were, but I wanted more. I wanted to turn my tragedy into something meaningful, something that would last long after the internet had moved on to the next scandal. That's when I was contacted by a producer from a major investigative news show. She wanted to do a full segment on my story, to examine the broader issue of emotional abuse in families, the way wealth and status can enable cruelty, and what happens when the scapegoat finally fights back. I agreed, but with one condition. I would appear in shadow, protecting my privacy and safety, but I would use the platform to announce something. I was starting a foundation called the Leo Foundation, named for my son, to provide legal and psychological support to children suffering from emotional abuse in families. Too often, emotional abuse goes unrecognized because there are no physical scars. I wanted to change that. The interview aired on a Sunday night in February, 3 months after that terrible Thanksgiving. I sat in shadow, my face obscured, but my voice was clear and strong. I told my story again, this time with the weight and credibility of a major news program behind it. They had interviewed the police, the doctors, Frank, even other members of my family's community who confirmed the dysfunction and cruelty. The interviewer asked me what I wanted people to take away from my story. I looked into the camera, knowing my family would be watching, and I said, I want people to know that you don't owe your abusers forgiveness. You don't owe them a relationship just because you share DNA. Some people don't deserve a place in your life, no matter who they are. And when you finally walk away, when you finally choose yourself, you're not being selfish, you're being smart. The response was overwhelming. Donations poured into the Leo Foundation. People shared their own stories of family trauma. Therapists reached out offering to volunteer. Lawyers offered pro bono services. Within a week, we had raised over $100,000, and then something extraordinary happened. A tech entrepreneur from Silicon Valley, a man who had built a billion-dollar company and was known for his philanthropy, reached out directly. He had been following my story. He too had grown up in an abusive household, though his was marked by physical violence rather than emotional abandonment. He wanted to donate $5 million to the Leo Foundation. $5 million. It was more money than I had ever imagined. It meant we could help thousands of children. It meant we could fund research, create programs, change lives. My personal tragedy had become a national movement. The news of the donation made headlines. Suddenly, my story wasn't just about family dysfunction. It was about resilience, about turning pain into purpose, about how sometimes the people who try to destroy you end up giving you the greatest gift, the motivation to become someone they can never touch again. My family's destruction was complete. Marcus never recovered professionally. Ashley was forced to sell the Greenwich house at a loss. They divorced within the year, each blaming the other for their fall from grace. She moved into a small apartment, taking a job as a receptionist, a far cry from her former lifestyle. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she spent her days scrolling through her old Instagram photos, mourning the life she had lost. My parents had to sell the Westport estate. The house that had been in my mother's family for 3 generations went to strangers. They moved to a modest condo in Florida, where no one knew their history. They lived in exile, their reputations destroyed, their social standing obliterated. Every time they introduced themselves, someone would Google their names and discover what they had done. The criminal charges were eventually reduced to misdemeanor reckless endangerment through a plea deal. They each paid fines and did community service. It was a slap on the wrist legally, but the social consequences were life sentences. I never spoke to any of them again. The protective order remained in place, and I never felt the urge to lift it. They tried to reach out a few times through intermediaries, usually when they needed money or wanted to see Leo. I declined every request. They had made their choice that Thanksgiving night, and I had made mine in the hospital bed when I pressed charges. We were done. A year after that terrible night, Leo and I moved to Vermont. We found a small house in a quiet town, nothing fancy but ours. I took a position as the executive director of the Leo Foundation, working with an amazing team of people dedicated to helping children escape toxic family situations. My writing became focused on advocacy and education. I published a memoir under a pseudonym that became a bestseller, with all proceeds going to the foundation. Leo started first grade in a school where no one knew our history, where he was just another kid with a loving mom. He was happy, secure, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about us. He made friends easily, played soccer, loved his teacher. He still remembered that Thanksgiving night sometimes, but his therapist said he was processing it healthily. He knew his mother had protected him, that we had survived together, and that we were safe now. One October afternoon, a year and a half after that night, Leo and I sat on our front porch carving pumpkins for Halloween. The Vermont autumn was spectacular, all brilliant reds and golds. Leo was carefully scooping out pumpkin seeds, his tongue sticking out in concentration. I watched him and felt something I had never experienced in my parents' house: peace. "Mom," Leo said, looking up at me with his serious eyes, "are we going to Grandma and Grandpa's for Thanksgiving this year?" I had been preparing for this question. "No, sweetheart, we're going to have our own Thanksgiving, just you and me. We'll make a turkey and all your favorite foods, and we'll watch movies and play games. How does that sound?" He considered this carefully. "Will Frank come?" I smiled. Frank had become a regular presence in our lives, checking in on us, taking Leo to baseball games, being the kind of stable male figure the boy needed. "I'll invite him. I bet he'd love to come." "Good," Leo said, returning to his pumpkin. "I like our Thanksgivings better anyway." As the sun set over the Vermont hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, I thought about how far we had come. My family had tried to erase me, to leave me to die because I was an inconvenience to their perfect image. They had believed I would stay silent, that I would swallow the abuse one more time, because that was what I had always done. They had been wrong. I had survived, and in surviving, I had found my voice. That voice had become a podcast that reached millions. It had become a foundation that helped thousands. It had become a movement that changed how people thought about family obligation and abuse. Every time a child was removed from a dangerous home because of the Leo Foundation's intervention, it was my answer to what they had done. Every time a parent learned to set boundaries with toxic family members because of my story, it was my victory. Every time someone found the courage to walk away from people who hurt them, it was proof that surviving is the best revenge. The Thanksgiving they left me to die, they thought they were getting rid of a problem. They thought they were protecting their precious image and reputation. What they actually did was free me. They freed me from the burden of seeking their approval. They freed me from the delusion that they would ever love me the way I deserved. They freed me to become someone far more powerful than they could have imagined. I looked down at the scar on my leg, visible below my jeans. It would never fully fade. Some wounds leave permanent marks, but I didn't hide it anymore. That scar was proof that I had survived something meant to kill me. It was proof that I was stronger than their cruelty. They wanted me to disappear. Instead, I became impossible to ignore. They wanted silence. I gave the world truth. They wanted to maintain their image. I shattered it completely. I had spent 32 years trying to earn love from people incapable of giving it. That Thanksgiving night on the ice, bleeding and broken, I finally understood that some people don't deserve your love, your loyalty, or your life. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is survive, speak up, and build something beautiful from the ruins they left behind. The foundation was my legacy now. Every child we helped, every family we guided toward healing, every voice we empowered to speak their truth was a testament to the fact that they had failed. They had tried to destroy me, and I had turned their cruelty into a catalyst for change. Leo finished his pumpkin and held it up proudly. "Look, Mom! I made it smile." I pulled him close, kissing the top of his head. "It's perfect, baby. Just perfect." As darkness fell and we lit the jack-o'-lanterns on the porch, their warm glow pushing back the shadows, I felt something settle deep in my soul. This was home. This was family. Not the people who shared my blood, but the life I had built from nothing, the community I had created, the purpose I had found. They say living well is the best revenge, but I had discovered something even better. Living well and making sure the world knows exactly why you had to leave is the sweetest revenge of all. The Thanksgiving they left me to die became the day I was finally born. Not as their disappointing daughter, not as the family scapegoat, but as Chloe. Just Chloe. A survivor, a mother, an advocate, a woman who refused to be silenced. And every day I wake up in my Vermont home, every day I go to work at the foundation, every day I tuck Leo into bed safe and loved, is my ongoing answer to what they did. They wanted me gone. Instead, I became immortal. My story would be told and retold. It would inspire others. It would create change. Long after they were forgotten, reduced to cautionary tales in psychology textbooks about narcissistic families, the Leo Foundation would continue helping children. That was the real victory. They had tried to end my story on that icy driveway. Instead, they had given me the beginning I needed. And the story I was writing now, the story of survival and purpose and transformation, was one they could never take away. The jack-o'-lanterns flickered on the porch, their carved smiles bright against the gathering dark. Inside our warm house, hot chocolate waited and a pile of Halloween movies was queued up for our evening. This was what mattered. This was what they could never understand or destroy. Love wasn't about blood. It was about choice. And I had chosen myself, chosen my son, chosen life. That choice had saved us both. As winter approached Vermont with its promise of clean white snow, so different from that deadly black ice in Connecticut, I found myself reflecting on the strange mathematics of abuse. For 32 years, I had subtracted pieces of myself trying to become small enough, quiet enough, perfect enough to earn their love. I had divided my worth by their criticism until I was almost nothing. But that night on the ice, something shifted. I stopped subtracting and started multiplying. The foundation multiplied my pain into purpose. The podcast multiplied my voice into a chorus. The lawsuit and criminal charges multiplied consequences they thought they'd never face. And every child we saved multiplied the meaning of my survival. Maria, my lawyer from the Haven, who had become a close friend, stopped by one evening in late November. She brought wine and news. "You're not going to believe this," she said, settling onto my couch with a grin. "Ashley tried to get a job at a nonprofit. Guess which one?" "No," I said, already laughing. "Yes. She applied to work at a domestic violence prevention organization. Can you imagine? The woman who kicked your purse away while you bled on ice thinks she's qualified to help abuse victims." "What happened?" "They Googled her name during the interview. She didn't even make it past the first round." Maria sipped her wine. "But here's the really good part. The director of that organization called me personally. She wanted to donate to the Leo Foundation and asked if we'd be willing to do some cross-training with their staff. Your story has opened doors, Chloe. Real doors that lead to real change." I thought about that often in the weeks that followed. How my family's cruelty had inadvertently created opportunities to prevent other families from following the same toxic patterns. We were developing curriculum for schools about recognizing emotional abuse. We were training social workers to take psychological harm as seriously as physical harm. We were funding research into the long-term effects of being scapegoated in families. None of it would have happened if they hadn't left me on that ice. And that was perhaps the deepest irony of all. In trying to erase me, they had ensured I would never be forgotten. Thanksgiving arrived, our second one since that night. Frank came as promised, bringing his famous apple pie and stories that made Leo laugh until his sides hurt. We ate turkey and stuffing at our small kitchen table, the three of us plus 2 other families from our neighborhood who had become dear friends. It was loud and chaotic and full of love, everything a Thanksgiving should be. After dinner, as Frank and Leo built a blanket fort in the living room, one of my neighbors, Janet, helped me with dishes. She was a therapist who worked with traumatized children, and we had become close over the past year. "Can I ask you something?" Janet said quietly, scrubbing a pot. "Do you ever regret going public with what happened? Pressing charges? All of it?" I considered the question carefully. "Not for a second. You know what I regret? All those years I stayed silent, all those times I made excuses for them. All those moments I convinced myself that their love was conditional because I hadn't earned the unconditional kind yet. That's what I regret. Do you think they'll ever understand what they did?" I shook my head. People like that don't do self-reflection. They're too busy being victims of their own consequences. I'm sure in their minds, I'm the villain. I destroyed their lives out of spite. They can't conceive that actions have consequences, that cruelty eventually comes due. Does that bother you? It used to. I used to fantasize about them calling me, apologizing, begging for forgiveness. I used to imagine the satisfaction of refusing that forgiveness, or maybe granting it magnanimously. But you know what? I don't think about them anymore. They're not my family. The people in that living room, the team at the foundation, the community we've built here, that's my family now. Janet smiled. That's healing. Real healing. Not forgiveness, but indifference. She was right. Indifference was the final stage. I had gone through anger, hurt, grief for the family I never had. And now I had arrived at a place where they simply didn't matter. They were people who had hurt me once, but they had no power over my present or future. The holidays passed peacefully. Christmas in Vermont was magical. All twinkling lights and snow-covered trees. Leo got his first sled and spent hours flying down the hill behind our house. I watched him play with other children from the neighborhood, secure and happy, and knew I had broken the cycle. Whatever damage my family had done to me, it would stop with me. Leo would grow up knowing he was loved unconditionally, that his worth wasn't dependent on achievement or image, that family was supposed to be a safe harbor, not a battlefield. In January, I received an unexpected call. It was from a literary agent in New York. She had read my anonymous memoir and wanted to discuss a second book, this time published under my real name with my full story. She thought it could be even bigger than the first, that people were hungry for stories about breaking free from toxic families and building new lives. I thought about it for a week. Using my real name meant fully stepping out of the shadows. It meant my family would know exactly who was behind the Heirloom of Scars podcast. It meant complete exposure. But hadn't that been the point all along? They had tried to make me disappear, and I had refused. This would be the final refusal, the ultimate rejection of their shame. I called the agent back and said yes. The book took 8 months to write. It was harder than I expected, revisiting every painful memory, every cruel word, every moment of rejection. But it was also cathartic. I was taking my story back from them. They didn't get to define my narrative anymore. I did. When the manuscript was finished, my editor had one request. She wanted to include an epilogue about the foundation, about the concrete good that had come from tragedy. She wanted readers to see the full arc from victim to survivor to advocate. I wrote the epilogue in one sitting, the words pouring out like water from a broken dam. I wrote about the first child we had helped, a 12-year-old girl whose parents were using her as a pawn in their divorce, weaponizing love and threatening abandonment. I wrote about how the Leo Foundation had provided her with a therapist, a lawyer, and ultimately a path to living with her grandmother, where she was finally safe. I wrote about the 17-year-old boy who had been the scapegoat in his wealthy family, blamed for every problem, treated as defective. We had helped him get emancipated, finish high school, and get a full scholarship to college. He was studying social work now, planning to help other kids like himself. I wrote about the single mother whose own family had turned on her when she divorced an abusive husband they liked. We had provided legal support, therapy, and emergency housing assistance. She was thriving now, working as a paralegal and raising her 2 daughters with strength and grace. Story after story, each one a testament to the fact that abuse doesn't have to be the end of the story. It can be the catalyst for profound change. The book was scheduled for publication in October, almost 2 years after that Thanksgiving night. The publisher planned a major publicity campaign. I would do interviews, appear on talk shows, do a book tour. My face and name would be everywhere. A week before publication, I received a letter. It was from my mother, forwarded through my lawyer since the protective order was still in place. Maria called to tell me it had arrived and asked if I wanted her to read it first, to screen it for me. No, I said. I'll read it. I'm ready. The letter was 3 pages long, handwritten on my mother's expensive stationery. I could picture her at her desk in the Florida condo, probably overlooking some golf course, writing this with her fountain pen. It started with excuses. We didn't know you were that badly hurt. We thought you were being dramatic. You always made scenes. It wasn't as bad as you've made it sound. Then it moved to self-pity. Do you know what you've done to us? We've lost everything. Your father's health has declined from the stress. We had to leave our home, our community. We're pariahs because of you. Then came the real purpose of the letter. We're your parents. You owe us respect and loyalty. This book you're publishing is going to destroy what little we have left. We're asking you, as your mother and father, to reconsider. Don't publish it. Let our family heal privately. And finally, the threat. If you publish this book, you'll regret it. We'll sue you for everything you have. We'll make sure everyone knows you're a liar. We'll fight you until our last breath. I read the letter twice, waiting for the emotions to hit. Anger, hurt, maybe even a flicker of doubt. But all I felt was a distant sadness, not for myself but for them. They still didn't understand. They still believed they were the victims. They still thought they could control me. I called Maria. They want me to stop the book. They're threatening to sue. Let them try, Maria said calmly. Everything in that book is documented truth. They have no case. This is just a last, desperate attempt to silence you. I know. I'm not stopping. I just wanted you to know they tried. I took the letter outside and burned it in our fire pit. Leo was at a friend's house, so it was just me watching the expensive stationery curl and blacken, the words disappearing into ash. It felt symbolic somehow, watching their threats turn to nothing. The book published on schedule. The publisher's publicity campaign was even bigger than I had anticipated. I appeared on morning shows, late-night shows, news programs. I did readings in bookstores across the country. Everywhere I went, people lined up to share their own stories of family dysfunction and escaping toxic relationships. The book debuted at number 2 on the bestseller list and hit number 1 the following week. It stayed there for 12 weeks. The reviews were overwhelmingly positive. Critics praised my honesty, my refusal to sugarcoat or excuse abuse, my focus on solutions and healing rather than just trauma. But more than critical acclaim or sales numbers, what mattered were the messages I received. Thousands of them, from people who had been waiting their whole lives for permission to leave, for validation that they weren't crazy or ungrateful or wrong. My story gave them that permission. A college student wrote that she was finally cutting off her narcissistic mother after reading my book. A middle-aged man said he was going to therapy to deal with a lifetime of being the family scapegoat. A grandmother wrote that she was intervening to protect her grandchildren from her own daughter's toxic parenting. On and on, story after story of people breaking free. That was the revenge I had never anticipated. Not just destroying my family's reputation, though that had been satisfying, but creating a roadmap for others to escape their own toxic families. Turning my pain into a permission slip for thousands of people to choose themselves. My family never sued. Their lawyer must have explained that they would lose spectacularly and publicly. Instead, they disappeared further into their Florida exile. I heard through distant relatives that they never mentioned me. that they pretended I didn't exist, that in their version of events they only had one daughter and she had tragically made bad choices. Let them have their delusions. I had reality, and it was beautiful. 2 years after publication, on a crisp autumn morning, I stood in front of a brand new building in Burlington, Vermont. It was our first dedicated facility for the Leo Foundation, a beautiful 3-story structure with therapy rooms, legal offices, a children's play area, and meeting spaces for support groups. We had raised enough money to staff it fully, to offer our services completely free to families who needed help. Leo, now 8 years old and growing like a weed, stood next to me holding one end of the ceremonial ribbon. Frank held the other end. Maria and Janet and dozens of other people who had supported us were gathered around. Local news cameras captured the moment. I gave a short speech about why this building mattered, about the children who would be helped here, about the cycle of abuse we were working to break. And then Leo and Frank and I cut the ribbon together, officially opening the facility. As people toured the building, exclaiming over the bright, welcoming spaces we had created, a young woman approached me. She was maybe 20, with nervous eyes and hands that twisted together anxiously. "Miss Chloe?" she said quietly. "I just wanted to thank you. I read your book last year. I was living with my parents who, well, they were a lot like your family. I thought I was going crazy. I thought I was the problem. Your book helped me understand it wasn't me. I moved out 6 months ago. I'm in therapy now. I'm starting to heal. I just wanted you to know your story saved my life." I hugged her, this stranger who was really a sister in survival. "You saved your own life," I told her. "I just held up a mirror so you could see clearly. You did the hard work of leaving." She cried a little, and I cried with her, and Frank appeared with tissues and his gentle presence that always made everyone feel safe. This was what it was all about. These moments of connection, of recognition, of one survivor helping another find the path forward. That evening, back at our house, Leo and I made hot chocolate and settled on the couch. He was getting too big to curl up against me the way he used to, but he still did it, especially when he sensed I needed the comfort as much as he did. "Mom," he said thoughtfully, "do you think I'll remember what happened that night? When I'm grown up, will I remember being cold and scared?" I considered how to answer honestly without frightening him. "You might remember some of it, but you know what? That night doesn't define us. What defines us is what we did after. How we built this life together, how we help other people. The scary night was just one night, but we've had hundreds of good days since then." "I like our life," he said simply. "Me too, baby. Me too." Later, after Leo was asleep, I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. I had started writing again, working on a novel this time, fiction that drew on everything I had learned about family dynamics and survival. But before I started working on that, I did something I did every few months. I Googled my family's names. The search results were still dominated by articles about what they had done, about the foundation, about my book. Their old life, their social standing, their carefully crafted image, had been completely erased and replaced with the truth of who they really were. But I also noticed something new. Ashley had started using her married name again, even though she was divorced. She was trying to hide, to create distance from the scandal. My father had a new LinkedIn profile with only vague information about his past career. They were trying to rebuild in the shadows, away from recognition. I could have done more. I could have continued to expose them, to make sure they could never escape what they did. But I realized I didn't want to. Not because I forgave them or felt sorry for them, but because they had become irrelevant. They were small, powerless people trying to hide from consequences. And I was too busy creating good in the world to bother with them anymore. I closed the laptop and went to the window. Snow was starting to fall, the first of the season. Vermont winters were long and cold, but they were also beautiful in a way Connecticut never had been. This snow was clean and pure, not the freezing rain and black ice of that terrible night. This snow was gentle, transforming the world into something peaceful and new. In 3 weeks, it would be Thanksgiving again, our third one in Vermont. We were hosting this year, filling our small house with friends and chosen family. Frank would be there, of course, and Maria and Janet and their families, some of the staff from the foundation. A few families we had helped who had become dear to us. It would be loud and chaotic and imperfect and everything a holiday should be. I thought about the journey from that night on the ice to this moment. How I had been left for dead and had chosen to live. How I had been silenced and had found my voice. How I had been erased and had made myself impossible to ignore. The revenge I had imagined in those early days had been petty. I had wanted to see them suffer, to watch them lose everything, to make them feel the pain they had inflicted on me. And yes, all of that had happened. But the real revenge, the revenge that sustained me, was simpler and more profound. I had become happy, genuinely, deeply, peacefully happy. I had built a life full of meaning and purpose. I had raised a child who was kind and secure. I had created something that would outlast all of us, that would help people for generations to come. They had wanted me to disappear, and instead I had bloomed. That was the revenge they could never escape. Every day I woke up and chose joy was a day their power over me diminished further. Every life the Foundation touched was proof that they had failed to destroy me. And the most beautiful irony of all? My family's names would be remembered only in connection to what they had done to me. Their entire legacy had been reduced to a footnote in my story. They were the villains in a narrative they didn't control, couldn't change, and would never escape. I was the author now. I was the one who decided how the story would be told and what it would mean. And I had chosen to tell a story not about bitterness or victimhood, but about survival and transformation and the unstoppable power of truth. The snow continued to fall outside, covering everything in white. In a few hours, Leo would wake up excited about the snow, begging to go sledding before school. Frank would probably call to see if we needed anything from town. Maria would text with some update about the Foundation. The ordinary, beautiful rhythms of our life would continue. And somewhere in Florida, in a small condo far from the life they once had, my family would wake up to another day of living with what they had done. They couldn't outrun it. They couldn't pay for it to go away. They couldn't charm or manipulate their way back to respectability. They had left me to die on the ice, and I had built an empire from that frozen moment. An empire of compassion and justice and second chances. An empire that bore my son's name and would continue long after we were all gone. That was true revenge. Not destruction for its own sake, but transformation. Taking the weapon they had used against me and beating it into something that helped others. Turning their cruelty into a catalyst for widespread change. Making sure that their worst moment became my greatest triumph. I went to bed that night with snow falling outside and my son sleeping safely down the hall. I slept peacefully, without nightmares, without fear, without the weight of their judgment. They had tried to end my story on a driveway in Connecticut. Instead, they had given me a beginning. And the story I was writing now, with every choice, every day, every person helped, was one they could never take away. The ice had melted, the wounds had healed into scars that told a story of survival. And I was finally, completely, gloriously free.